The security camera blinked red, recording everything. Yet somehow, when the footage was reviewed, the most crucial 5 minutes were missing. The cash drawer at the small-town grocery store was short by $1,200, and the store manager, Richard, already had someone in mind to blame. He didn't need proof. He just needed a name, and Darnell's was the easiest one. By the time the police arrived, whispers had already spread through the aisles. The quiet black cashier with the polite smile was suddenly the center of every stare. What no one knew, though, was that behind those missing minutes on the tape lay a truth so deeply buried it would expose more than just a theft. It would reveal the kind of prejudice that poisons even the simplest corners of life. Darnell James was 27, a quiet man who took pride in small things, the symmetry of stacked apples, the shine of the store windows he cleaned before every shift, and the simple thank yous from regular customers. For 3 years, he had worked the closing shift at Wilton's Market, a family-owned grocery store in rural Virginia. He was always early, never complained, and carried himself with a calm dignity that often disarmed people who had expected something else. "You're different," some of the white customers said, meaning it as a compliment, though it never felt like one. Richard, the store manager, was in his mid-40s, tall, neatly dressed, and always smiling when the owner was around. But behind that smile was something sharper. He rarely spoke directly to Darnell unless it was about work, and when he did, his tone carried the stiffness of someone who saw discipline, not equality, as leadership. On the day everything began, a thick summer humidity filled the air. The store buzzed with the slow rhythm of regulars, a quiet day until the end of the night when the register count came up short. Richard stayed late, pacing the small office. The cameras were checked and the footage was clear, except for one section, 9:42 to 9:47 p.m., a sudden black screen. That was the same time Darnell had been near the register, finishing his shift. Richard didn't call the owner first. He called the police. By the next morning, Darnell's name was already circulating through the staff group chat. His friends texted him in disbelief. His neighbors whispered outside their porches, and the look from his mother that evening said it all. Not disappointment in him, but exhaustion in the world. For Darnell, the story had already been written. All that remained was to live through it. The police came quietly at first, asking questions, jotting notes, pretending neutrality. They didn't cuff Darnell, but their presence alone, 2 uniformed men standing beside a young black cashier, was enough to paint the image people would remember. Darnell explained everything, how he'd balanced the drawer, locked it, logged his total, and left. But the missing footage shadowed every word he said. Richard handed over the tape like a man delivering a final verdict. Days turned into weeks. The store's owner, Mr. Wilton, an elderly man who rarely visited, placed Darnell on administrative leave pending investigation. It was a polite way of saying, "Stay home, unpaid, while we decide if we'll believe you." Darnell spent those weeks retracing every step, questioning himself, even though he knew he hadn't done it. His phone rang less, his friends hesitated more. The world, once friendly in its routines, now looked at him through narrowed eyes. He walked through town, hearing the subtle changes in people's greetings, hey turning into silence, smiles becoming avoidance. The story had spread faster than the truth ever could. Then came the worst moment. His landlord slipped an eviction notice under his door. "Sorry, man, too much attention around you. The neighbors are nervous." That night, Darnell sat in his small apartment, surrounded by boxes, his uniform folded neatly on the couch. He thought of his mother's words from childhood. "You'll have to be twice as good to be seen as equal." He had lived by that creed every day, and here he was, condemned without proof. Meanwhile, Richard carried on as though nothing had happened. He smiled wider in the store, assuring customers that things were being handled. But beneath the surface, guilt was growing. A young assistant manager named Melissa had begun to notice strange things. Richard's after-hours visits to the office, his sudden purchase of a new watch, and his insistence that no one check certain storage boxes in the back room. One night, when the store was empty, Melissa stayed late under the pretense of organizing inventory. She found the boxes hidden behind cleaning supplies. Inside one was a small envelope marked "Do Not Touch." It contained cash, nearly $1,000, bundled neatly, the exact amount missing from the drawer, minus a few bills. Her heart pounded. She froze, torn between fear and duty. If she came forward, she could lose her job. Richard had the owner's ear. But if she didn't, an innocent man would carry the weight of a lie. The next morning, she watched Darnell walk past the store, his head low, avoiding eye contact. That image haunted her. The truth was there, waiting to be spoken. But in a world built on quiet prejudice, speaking up required more courage than most people ever find. Melissa made her choice. One evening, she returned to the store with a flash drive in her pocket. She had spent the past few nights reviewing backup camera footage from a second system most employees didn't know existed, an older set that Richard had dismissed as broken. To her surprise, it wasn't. It had captured everything. The lost 5 minutes were no mystery. The footage showed Richard himself walking to the register after hours, glancing around, pocketing cash, and then deleting the original clip from the system. Her hands trembled as she copied the file. She knew what this meant. The next morning, she called the owner. Her voice cracked as she told him what she'd found, sending over the video before fear could make her change her mind. Within hours, Richard was summoned to the office. When confronted, he tried to deny it, until the video played on the small monitor, frame by frame, showing his guilt in unforgiving clarity. The owner's face drained of color. Darnell was called that same afternoon. The words "I'm sorry" were said, but they carried no weight. Apologies couldn't erase the humiliation, the lost job, the eviction, and the stares that had followed him everywhere. Richard was arrested for theft and tampering with evidence. Melissa, though shaken, found herself both relieved and broken, knowing that the truth had finally surfaced, but at a cost no one could measure. When Darnell left the store that day, he didn't look back. The aisles that once smelled of fresh produce now carried the bitter scent of memory. The sun outside felt harsh, as if mocking the idea of justice delayed. Weeks later, a quiet settlement was offered. A check, an apology letter, and a promise to improve policies. The town moved on quickly. They always did. The story that once filled gossip circles faded, replaced by new distractions. But for Darnell, life didn't return to normal. He couldn't unsee the way people had looked at him. Suspicion first, humanity second. He couldn't forget how fast everyone had believed the worst. He went to a new job in another town, far enough away to breathe again. Every morning, as he put on his new uniform, he looked in the mirror, not to check his tie, but to remind himself that he was still here, still standing, still worthy. Melissa, too, carried her own silence. She had done the right thing, but even that came with whispers. Some called her a hero, others a traitor. In her heart, she knew that truth shouldn't require bravery, yet in this world, it always did. One afternoon, as Darnell walked home from work, a child ran up to him, a little white boy from his new neighborhood, waving and smiling. "Hi, Mr. Darnell," he shouted. It was simple, innocent, pure. For the first time in months, Darnell smiled without effort. He realized that prejudice doesn't vanish overnight, but every act of truth, every person who stands up, chips away at its walls. The story might have begun in a grocery store, but it was never just about stolen money. It was about the theft of dignity, the silent assumptions that still haunt every corner of society. And as the sun set that evening, Darnell's thoughts lingered on a single question, one he wished the world would finally ask itself. When the truth disappears for 5 minutes, who do we choose to believe?